Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank you and the ranking member for including language that prohibits the Air Force from implementing any of its proposed force structure adjustments without the committee's approval. We've had an opportunity to talk about this. I think many of us were disappointed in February when we learned of the Air Force's decision to propose some pretty major changes in the way that they operated. These changes came about pretty quickly without any transparency by individuals that were sworn to secrecy under non-disclosure agreements. They were changes that were proposed without consulting commanders, adjutant generals, and probably most importantly, some of the key military leaders in the field. The committee's report, and it's worth quoting because I think you said it very, very well. The statement is, instead of correcting years of poor fiscal discipline, the department chose to make substantial reductions in force structure and take risks in meeting U.S. military commitments around the globe. Our situation in Alaska with Eielson, I think, was particularly demonstrative of this. The proposal that the Air Force made would literally put Eielson on ice unless the committee expressed the Air Force proposal or until the National Commission on the Future of Air Force recommendations are provided to the Congressional Defense Committees. But what this proposal would have done, it would have removed 1,372 active duty airmen from the base. It's a 59% reduction. Would have transferred year-round active duty F-16 to another base. It involved eliminating 179 civilians from the base, an unknown number of contractors. It effectively would have cut the size of Eielson in half, going from a population of 3,000 to about 1,480. Half of those then remaining on the base would have been the Alaska National Guard. They carry out a very critical mission in terms of the air refueling. So the problem is they would have been on the base and would have to continue a mission that's absolutely critical, but they would have had minimal Air Force support. I think it takes a certain amount of audacity, if you will, to pull something off without congressional consultation, without a background. Takes some audacity to tell a base that's been around for 88 years that they've got to close 3 schools practically overnight. Real estate values are in the tank practically overnight. 1/3 of the economy in the area down practically overnight. I think it was a blunder of the highest magnitude, certainly from a public relations perspective, but I think that it was also a planning blunder. They recognized that after they were able to do the truth assessment, if you will, that there were some assumptions that had been made that simply did not play out. The first assumption was that the first stage of this relocation would be cost-free. They then came back and said, well, it wasn't exactly properly budgeted. They assumed that no environmental review was going to be necessary. They came back and then later determined that a NEPA review would be required. It assumed that they could relocate all of these families from Anchorage, or to Anchorage, into areas within about 20 miles from the base, and then came back and said, well, we relied on Craigslist to determine the housing availability. And unfortunately, in the Anchorage area right now, they've got less than a 2% availability in housing. It assumed that the Anchorage schools had sufficient capacity. It too was fatally flawed. The Air Force admits that they can't do without Eielson. They need Eielson Air Force Base to fuel the Pacific. They need Eielson to support the operations at the Joint Pacific-Alaska Range Complex, and they need it for the strategic location. So I appreciate, again, Mr. Chairman, that you have looked at this issue very critically, made a determination that, that without some level of congressional oversight and working with us as well as the military leaders, that we put a hold, we put a pause to ensure that we're moving in the right direction. So I greatly appreciate your efforts with that.
Chairman.